Hello and welcome to my Learn With Me Minifreak series. This is episode 11, Effects. So first, what is a Learn With Me series? A Learn With Me series is a series where you follow my end-to-end process in learning to get the best out of a synthesizer. In this case, it is the Arturia Minifreak. Thus far, we've looked through the majority of the features in terms of sound design, and now we're going to move into the effects section. So without further ado, let's create an init patch and let's shape the sound a little bit, and then we can work from there. So since some of these will be time-based effects, I'd like something which is functionally something between a pluck and a pad. So let's go. Okay, let's get some velocity sensitivity in here. Let's add a little LFO to cut off. One free running. LFO 1 rate, modulated slightly by the keyboard to get the LFOs out of phase. Okay. Okay. Spent a little longer than I wanted on that. Let's go straight into the effects section. So we have 3 effects, effect slot 1, 2, and 3. They all have a common set of effects, except that effect slot 2 adds a delay effect, and effect slot 3 adds a reverb effect. If we go in the sound edit menu for effects, we can see that the delay can be either a send or an insert, and the reverb can equally be a send or an insert. So what that means is when the effect is a send, then the dry signal gets sent to that effect while the dry signal continues to sound in the normal way. So this is an additive process. The same is true for both the delay and the reverb. With the insert mode, the same wet dry is available to you rather than just an effect send. And that firstly means you can get a completely wet signal, so none of the dry signal comes through. And secondly, it means the next effect in the chain is processing the output of the previous one. So that could mean, for example, that the delay is processing the output of effect 1 and the reverb is processing the output of the delay. Anyway, let's go to effect 1. Let's click the encoder to enable it, and let's quickly scan through the types: chorus, super unison, phaser, flanger, distortion, bit crusher, 3-band EQ, peak EQ, multi-compressor. First, chorus. They all have subtypes, so if we hold shift, we can rotate and we can see we have default, lush, dark, shaded, single. So let's start with default. Let's turn it to full wet so we can hear the rate. Nice, quite soft. Let's try another subtype. That was default, this one lush. So this has some space around it, almost like there's a reverb going on. Next subtype. Quite far in the background, let's try in the bass. Continuing, shaded. Moving on, single. So a chorus is using delayed copies of the sound. I presume single means there's just a single delayed copy. Let's disable, let's leave this effect slot enabled and move to the next effect. Super unison. I'm going to go full wet to try and see what the parameters do. We have detune and filter. So if you turn the detune up, you're getting unison. Here is supposed to be multiple copies of the sound played slightly detuned from one another at the same time. So the detune controls how much it's detuned, and the intensity knob controls a filter, which is when turned up a high pass, when turned down a low pass. So there's all high pass, there's all low pass, no detune. Bring the dry back in. Has a feel a bit like a chorus, but it doesn't quite have that same meandering motion. Subtype, that was classic. Next one is ravey. So it feels like there's a bit of more pulsing sound going on there. Ravey. Next one is Solly. And similar to classic, I'm not quite sure what the difference is. Next one is slow. A bit more of a pulsing sound like that ravey one. I feel like let's just skip ahead. And some of them were called trig. So I'm assuming then that the effect, the cycle of the detune, is synchronized to a key press. Let's move on to the next effect type, phaser. Let's do it full wet. Classic phaser sound. If you mess with the wet dry, you can get it to sit in the background quite nicely, which I quite enjoy. Subtypes, so that was default. Next is default sync. So I'm assuming, yes, so that means that the time is synced to the tempo here. So I think that could work nicely. Alongside the sequence or alongside something else, tempo sync. Let's move forward. Space. I guess S and 8 sample and hold, I suppose. So let's listen. Sync. And there's a sync variant of that, and finally space. Let's play fast. So it's wide, but it doesn't have that reverb feel that some of these do. Let's move on. Next effect, flanger. And then let's get full wet to set a tempo. I like the sound. On. That was default sync, then we have silly. Let's listen to silly. So it has less of a flanger tone, it has more of a pulsating motion, but again, an interesting sound. Let's move on. We've got quite a few, so let's go faster. Distortion, classic, soft clip, germanium, dual fold, tape. Let's try tape. Let's go full wet. We have a high pass, low pass filter. Interesting, the distortion can go really, really far. And the wet dry lets you do an interesting parallel distortion. So the high pass filter gets a lot of timbral shift. Let's try another one of these. Let's try germanium. Interesting as well, because of the amount of gain this gives, if you played it gently, still sounds loud, but as you play harder, you get more distortion. As you stack more notes, so you can get some timbral variation. So it's a nice additional expression parameter. Pretty interesting. Let's move on to the next one, bit crush. So let's say what a bit crusher is. A bit crusher, traditionally, when values are encoded digitally, there are only a certain number of possible values across the range of amplitudes in a sound. These are usually encoded in binary, and the number of binary digits made available represents 2 to the power of that represents the number of possible values that you can have. So bit crushing is taking whatever that is and applying a fewer number of bits, which will be a type of distortion. The other parameter here is decimate, which I believe will throw away some of the samples, so that'll break up the sound. We're on full wet. No subtypes. A lot of variation that's available to you there. Let's move on. 3-band EQ. Mid IK, wide, default. So this seems to be an EQ where you have 3 fixed bands and you can adjust. So let's try turning them down. Not much in the bass in this sound, let's play lower. Since all 3 parameters are used for the EQ, there's no wet dry in this. Let's try one of the others. That was default. Wide. And mid IK. So I presume this is selecting where the frequency cutoffs and the crossovers between these bands are. Moving on. Peak Q. So what do we have? No subtypes. That's a frequency, that's a gain, and that's a width. So I'm assuming this is going to increase, ramp up, or possibly even decrease the amplitude of a certain frequency. We can adjust the bandwidth of the effect and where that happens. So let's try. So that's narrow. So we have a capacity to add a sort of resonance here, which I think is interesting. Next is multi-comp. So we have, this is a compressor. Let's see if we leave it all around the middle. So the time parameter seems to be how aggressively the release happens. So when the time is low, the release is long. When the time is high, the release is short. So tone seems to be a timbre control for the color. The other types, yes, that was OPP, bass control, high control. All up, tighter. So I think the sound of the compressor is not way overboard. I think it's relatively subtle, which makes it quite useful for adding a little character to the sounds. Let me listen. I think this OPP one has a bit of noise as well, which again is another interesting character. That's all of them. So I'm going to disable this. I'm going to go to the second effect slot, and it has all the same available, but I'm only going to use the delay. So one thing that I mentioned, if we look through the subtypes, we have digital, stereo, ping pong, filtered, filtered ping pong. You may think, well, stereo, what does that mean? Stereo means that there are 2 mono delays, 1 per channel. Unlike a ping pong where there's a mono input and the delays are going to be output from one to the other, so you get this left-right bounce. Since the oscillator section is monophonic, if you're using this as a send, I think you're only going to be receiving a monophonic signal. So the fact that it's stereo makes little difference. If the effect is going to be an insert, then if the prior effect is something which makes the sound stereo, then the delay is going to receive that. So that was stereo. Let's try ping pong. Nice. Let's keep moving. Filtered. So the parameters are the time, the feedback, and a wet-dry mix, just like you'd expect. That wet-dry, when we're in send mode, would be a send level. You have tempo synced versions of these things. So then time is in time divisions, quarter triplets. So you can hear we go full wet and the initial sound doesn't actually sound. Okay, now let's move on to the last slot, which has got for us a reverb. There are a few types. Let's see, we've got default, long, hall, echoes, room, dark hall. Let's try hall, bit of a classic. Try a lot of decay, a little damping. In fact, let's try long just to see how long really is. Let's say full send. Load. Long is indeed long. Let's try using that as an insert. So we can hear the full wet. That was longs. Hall, a little bit more metallic, a bit brighter. Echoes, a bit more broken up. Room, reminds me of a room, like a bathroom almost. Dark room, a little less bright. Still goes quite long. Damping is adjusting how much of the sound is taken out in this loop. Sounds nice, so let's try and... Okay, so now we've got three effects all layered. Let's take all the effects out. Okay, so I think that's been a quick fly through all of the effects. I hope that that's given you a flavor for the capabilities here. I think the effects are a huge value add over the Minifreak, especially if you're going to be using this in a live context, in a studio context where you always have the capacity to rely on effects in your DAW. But having these integrated, and as you'll see, having the capacity to adjust them with both the macros and the mod matrix can lead to some very interesting possibilities. In any case, thanks for joining me today, and goodbye.